When you look up the history of why the UK originally joined, with what the beginning of the economic, the European Economic Partnership originally, what it was before it would become the EU, it was done because UK businesses were just tired of being permanently uncompetitive in Europe, not being able to play on the level playing field that everywhere else was playing, being severely disadvantaged because the UK was not in the same systems and etc. as a part of that. Again, de Gaulle, part of the reason to blame for that because he had long, very held deeply beliefs about some of the stuff and the way that he was treated by the UK in sort of World War II, etc. That's a whole thing. But yeah, there was sort of a lot of reasons, and it all came back to businesses sort of forcing this, and ultimately, it's going to happen again. I tell you this now as someone who sort of has worked in a marketing company, has worked as sort of freelance. Building relationships takes a long time. Even sometimes, if you get like a job from someone, they're not immediately going to come back to you straight away. You know, it takes a long time to really, really build up a lot of relationships. It doesn't happen overnight. Same for businesses as well. So losing business relationships, which we are seeing a lot of this stuff go on, especially in the horticultural industry, because I was thinking about doing either this article that we're going to go over today, or there was another article in the Financial Times where a horticultural business in the UK, because of how bad the checks are, which we'll be seeing in a moment, they've set up their own inland processing center just to be able to do it themselves and to help other plant companies and horticultural, businesses in the UK. Because in some cases, these checks that are being sort of carried out very obviously are, as again, it's in that other article, being carried out by people who are not properly trained and are in some cases destroying the plants and the produce that is coming in. So, what must you think then if you are an EU, uh, you know, plant grower? You are in the horticultural business. What then happens? Well, ultimately, your relationships with UK buyers deteriorates. Ultimately, you get frustrated, and ultimately, you just say, "Well, what's the point?" Now, we already saw this with small companies. That small companies almost immediately said, "No, we ain't doing this. It's just too much work, too much red tape. We ain't going to start doing this." But now it's getting even worse, as we always said it would, and eventually there would be severe consequences. This is when relationships start to break down. This is when EU companies start to say, "We're just not going to bother anymore." It's just too much hassle. It's not worth it's not worth the business that they actually get all this hassle, and they turn away. And yet, as I've said before, businesses, if you've never sort of worked that high up or seen that level of a business, that can happen all the time, and that can happen because of like different business relationships, people not keeping promises, not delivering consistently on time. Happens all the time in business, but now you're seeing a very, very severe consequence of this with EU suppliers, and this is going to have huge, huge economic consequences. And ultimately, what's again going to happen is you're going to get UK businesses start shouting massively. So they are already starting to raise their voices now. Eventually, that shout will become deafening, and the obvious direction of where they want to go will be pretty obvious. Now, there is, of course, we've talked about the meteorological and metallurgical bill that's coming in. I know, amazing bill name, but in that bill is a requirement that basically says if businesses want to continue with alignment with European rules and regulations, then the UK government will do that, and it will be based on a government consultation with businesses. What do you think? Bear in mind what I've just said there is going to be the ultimate reason for us continuing to follow EU rules and regulations is because businesses want to continue following those rules and regulations. It is not worth having two production lines. It never, ever is worth having two simultaneous production lines for exactly the same thing, just with a different label. It costs a lot of money just to do that. Even the production line itself, setting that up, costs a lot of money. So businesses do not want to do that. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen. UK businesses will say, we want to continue with this. And then, as I've always said, you get to a point of, well, if we're following all these things, then why aren't we in the customs union? Why aren't we in the single market? Why aren't we, full members of the European Union? These questions always lead back to that. And of course, when you start asking that question, there's very little reason for us not to start the process of, rejoining and whatnot. And you already see David Heggie, by the way, fantastic sort of guy on trade. I think I was on him with a Sunday brunch a couple of years ago now. But as he put out very recently, bear in mind this is like one of the UK's big trade experts said, yeah, oh looks like the EU is actually interested because they are having a very significant presence in Liverpool this weekend because of the Labour conference. There's there's only so many times you can deny that something isn't happening when it's like bare in front of you with the eyes, and even someone like David Heggie is like saying, "Oh yeah, like the EU is down for this reset." Ultimately, I think Starmer is taking the Ming Val strategy with it, as he always is, as he did with the general election. Is it the safe way to go? Absolutely. I think there is still this worry about, oh, what happens if you are seen undoing Brexit? Is that like a massive sort of, saving grace for like the Tory party? Does it, amp up reform? Can they start, churning out something? Does this give them, a lot? Does they become a lot more bigger threat in the future down the line? We don't know. But again, it is very wise to do this. So I'm just going to go over something here that that a producer actually says in this. So where is it? So yes, this is from the Horticultural Society, and they sent a letter to the UK government saying these are awful. So commenting, of course, on the introduction of these checks, the letter said, all parties now involved in moving plants, trees, bulbs, boughs, and flowers between the EU and the UK are now doing so under maximum pressure, facing unimaginable increase to costs and experiencing now painful border processes, yet with now minimal information with which to do it. We recognize the need for a strong biosecurity system, yet one that still facilitates and encourages legitimate trade. This letter was prompted by an incident at the government's Sevington border control impost of Ashford last week, in which several lorries transporting plants from Italy were held for more than 8 days over fears that they were transporting pests into Britain. The Guardian understands that traces of Penzashi, I don't know how you even say this, Penzashi sinucus pests had been found in at least 8 containments. These had been given destruction notices. And then, of course, what happened was that the centre was not giving these businesses any notice or even communicating them with what was going on. It gets even weirder because Vino Marini, the chief executive of the haulage companies, Marini, which sends at least 15 lorries a week to Britain, told The Guardian that one of his drivers was then forced to stay in Kent near Sevington for 6 days after his company received information on after his company received no information on why their load had been held and when it would be released. Speaking last week, he said, the lorry has now been blocked for at least 8 days, and today I had to switch drivers. The first one was sleeping in the lorry all the time. How could I leave him out there without any information on how long this would take? We are being kept in the dark about everything. Marnini, who's been sending goods since the 1980s, said that the UK is now putting me into huge difficulties. I know other companies that have lost drivers too. They have now abandoned the UK due to this mess. Another effective Italian supplier, which preferred not to be named, said it had now paused deliveries to the UK over the concerns that similar holdups could now be taking place, leaving a number of UK customers now waiting for deliveries. And bear in mind, this also has an effect on European companies as well. So the company which relies on the UK for 60% of its business, 60% reliant on business with the UK. That's something you can't fully turn away from as a business. You can't just say bye-bye to 60% of your business. Now, maybe you can try and replace that with, other areas, but you can't just walk away from 60% of your business. Um, so the company that relies on at least 60% from the UK business said that it had now been no communication about what even happened, and many of the support lines were engaged. Gee, what a surprise, because that's not something that's happened before. And when they have tried to contact support agencies, the spokesperson of the company said that since the checks and transport costs have now gone up because lorries are now having to wait often 5 or even 6 hours for these checks, and you have to then put up the prices. The drivers don't want them to go because then they're getting sick and tired of waiting. So, yeah, the these things are just becoming to a breaking point where these are just completely unworkable. It just puts the cost too much up, and then what's going to happen? Businesses are going to turn around and go, "We want this sorting," and they are not going to be quiet about it. They are not going to be quiet about it. First of all, they will start to raise their voices, and then they will start to shout, and then that shouting will become deafening. And at that point, the Labour government will have to act. Now, it is being very good because it is listening a lot to businesses. We've seen that very recently. We've seen that they have been sort of very reactive and sort of responsive to when businesses sort of make complaints. So we'll see what happens if they try to do anything about this. But interesting times ahead for stuff like this. But yeah, relationships like this, if they strain, if they break, can be very, very difficult to put back together. Very, very difficult. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting time for I think for a lot of UK businesses that are still very reliant on EU supply chains. Indeed. So as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.